There may be other people drifting in, but welcome everybody to the... Oh,
sorry.
Hi.
Speaking of drifting in, right on cue.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Hedi Gottfried from Wayne State University in Detroit. Heidi is got her PhD at the University of Wisconsin.
Go Red, go Big Red.
And which I did too. And she has studied for many years a number of things, Germany, but especially Japan. And she has a special interest in gender issues in Japan. And so today she's going to give us a talk on precarious work in Japan, forms new risks. Tomorrow also you're all invited to the working group where we're going to meet with Heidi again, and we have a few papers that we have read in preparation for that. If anybody wants those papers, just see Joe and he'll send them to you. They're probably on the website too.
Yeah, I think everybody on the listserv, which I think is everybody here, should.
Okay, great. So Heidi, welcome.
Well, thank
We
you.
look forward to hearing
You too, I had to read those articles again myself. So, what did I write in there? Why did I write in there? So, thank you very much. I do appreciate joining you, and just to let you know, to preview what we'll talk about today, I'm not going to talk about labor organizing and labor mobilization, but that is a topic that I'm very interested in, and I've worked with new forms of workers' organizations in the Japanese context, and that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow. Today it's going to be more institutional, and so I will talk about unions, but not really the sort of kinds of sort of grassroots mobilization that we see today, particularly in response to the disaster. And I want to thank Arnie, Kevin, and Dennis, and Joe also for the logistics. It was very easy to get into the city, and I was able to walk up the hill from the Sienna Hotel up to Chapel Hill. I've got now, I've got really great calves to show for it. So I'm bringing something back with me. So that's good. What I want to talk about today is sort of Japan, sort of on the brink. Very interestingly, I was in Japan 2 weeks before the tsunami, and so I feel and met with people from that area. So I feel a real sort of bond with people, and I want to talk a little bit about that, but from a historical perspective. So even though I'm a sociologist, I'm going to talk a lot about history. I want to talk about sort of 3/11, which is what many people in Japan talk about, their catastrophe and its aftermath. And what happened in its aftermath, which was sort of telescoped, actually like in the world press, at the New York Times, was the fact that you had migrant workers and day laborers who were cleaning up in the Fukushima Daiichi's plant. There was irradiated water that they were cleaning up. And it really shined the spotlight on migrant workers. Many of these migrant workers had not really almost disappeared to the shadows of the Japanese social structure and economy. They're not really seen very often. And this really, the scrutiny in the recovery effort really made apparent precariousness not only among migrants and day laborers in that area, but also more generally. So this was an important sort of moment within Japanese history, within Japanese political economy. Now, many people know there's some experts here in Japan. Those of you who are not experts, we have a sense or model of sort of Japan that we sort of carry around with us in terms of the social structure, being relatively egalitarian, low unemployment, and in fact, this model, this what I call the stylized model, has always really underestimated the real fault lines in society, the real social fault lines and fissures that undergirded what we saw on 3/11 and then its aftermath. It was already there, and that's what I want to argue is it's not something new. It's not new from the 1990s. It's not new since the disaster. So Japan is a model that we used to be celebrated. The two of us who are relatively older, know when it was that celebrated model, and Joe, and maybe Dennis, is in between, different generations. Those of us who can remember the celebration of this model as this high trust, high economic growth, and certain kind of management styles, what we call Japan Inc. Well, in fact, and that this began to break down in the 1990s during, the recession and the bursting of the economic bubble. I argue that, in fact, part-time work and temporary work and precarious employment has been part of the employment system for a very long time. And it's really embedded in the employment model, one that has not really been seen in that stylized version, but one that nonetheless is there, and that these patterns of precariousness are very gendered in a particular way in Japan and within a certain kind of model of employment model. That part-time employment in particular, and I'm going to petition day laborers, and I'll say a little bit about day laborers because it's really fascinating. And I don't know if you know Tom Gill, who's, so good. Because as an anthropologist, he actually studies the culture and subculture of day laborers, and he's been doing this for a long time. So anyone's interested in day laborers, I would pick up his work. And Matt Maher, who's a sociologist, has done comparative work on Tokyo and LA, looking at this community. So it's a really interesting comparison. Part-time employment was already growing in the 1970s. And we see it expanding, and I have, because I'm a sociologist, I have data, not just accounts, but actual, statistics that can be meaningful or meaningless, depending on how one wants to read them. But nonetheless, we can see that this dualism is really part of the Fordist model. My paper is going to be presented in 3 main sections, and you're not going to see the 3 main sections. I'm going to just tell you what they are. I was telling Dennis and Joe, I am no tech. I'm not even low tech. I'm no tech. So I have some visual images. I think it's important as well as some statistics, but I'm not going to give you text to read along with me. The first part is sort of a theoretical part where I extend social contract theory in light of political accommodations around what I call a corporate-centered male breadwinner reproductive bargain. I think I have all those words in there. Each of those words are very important, and they'll become clear in a moment. My argument is the logic behind this bargain, emphasizing enterprise-based welfare and minimal state support for social protection, gave rise to sharp dualism in the Japanese labor market, and I'll talk about how that happens. I'm going to also talk about this model as it developed prior to the 1990s. Often what happens is you see that precarious work, people start to map it from 1990 forward. I'm going to set it in a historical backdrop of the past 4 decades, where I want to deconstruct the narrative of the economic miracle and the stylized version of Japan Inc., and show that there are 2 historical turning points that contextualize both the rise of part-time and temporary work. I'm going to show that the trends are driven by different factors and forces. The first juncture is in the 1960s, when weak labor organizations at the national level and high fusion of labor representation with employers at the enterprise level deprived labor of a strong political lever for realizing a social bargain. Unions settled for strong internal labor markets that ensure job security and age-graded system of rewards for their members in large industrial companies, a model that you're familiar with. As a result, the reproductive bargain based on industrial citizenship rarely extended beyond the core workforce of salary men. Secondly is a period of the 1980s where there are accumulating pressures on this reproductive bargain, and particularly the challenges demographic challenges of the aging population, who's going to care for the aging population, if women are working, and also the declining fertility rate, which I think is part of this model, employment model, so that they come out of and are one of the kind of pressure points or frictions in this male breadwinner reproductive bargain. That's followed in the 1990s, where those pressures become even more acute, and the state intervenes legislatively to try to stimulate economic growth through trying to facilitate the growth of non-standard employment. So this is a state-led project, very much, but it's the state in relationship to business, and those are very tied together. The final part of my talk looks at the period from the mid-1980s to the present being 2007. It was when I had my sabbatical, and it was not quite the present, but I need to tell you what my present is. My present, when I was on sabbatical at Chanamisu University. And so a lot of my data, in terms of the qualitative, is from that period. The quantitative, some of it is from 2009. So I want to argue that regulation, not deregulation, but regulation was important to expanding and facilitating this growth of temporary work initially in the 1980s, and then subsequently part-time employment in the 1990s. So that the combination of deregulation and re-regulation codified part-time and temporary employment as distinct statuses without the benefits, without the social protections that became associated with the male breadwinner, the corporate-centered male breadwinner reproductive work. Let's fix some of those things. By analyzing historical turning points, not tipping points, but turning points, I'm not making an argument for Japan exceptionalism. I'm not saying that Japan, has a particular kind of culture that leads to consensus. In fact, I want to make it the opposite argument, that the consensus bargaining came out of a set of political accommodations, as opposed to they come out of a sort of cultural predisposition. And I want to argue that these turning points are important to sort of analyze, because these are the moments in which things get locked in, and then institutions and relationships become institutionalized, and then they tend to move, and I want to say tend, because I don't want to be over-deterministic, they tend to move path-dependently. They don't have to. I think we're at another one of those moments, and I'll end with, what moment we're in today, and whether we can foresee some changes. Is this a turning point historically? One that I'm going to pose to you, and you can tell me what you think, because it's hard to know. It's right at the beginning. The data that I'm drawing on comes out of a set of interviews that I've been conducting over since 1998 in Japan with trade associations, trade unions, with workers, with executives from the temporary help agency industry in Japan, as well as in Sweden, Germany, and the US. As well as the meeting with trade unionists in general, policymakers, and labor experts who are on the commission to determine these regulations. So I've met with many people who are involved in this process. And this has been a return to Japan on a yearly basis to do this. Actually, my last trip was 2 weeks before the tsunami. So it was last week. All right, so that's my paper in a nutshell. So let me talk about social contracts to reproductive bargaining. This is the kind of framework that I want to sort of use, and I think might be useful not only for Japan, but hopefully for other countries. I know that in this project, it's an intra-Asia project. Most of my work is actually Japan, European sort of comparisons. I think it is can be useful for the intra-Asia, and maybe we can talk about that.